of backdoor conversations going on here, which would appear to be leading to us giving away, once again, the rights of the fishermen of this country.
The great Brexit betrayal. This was the man who basically quadrupled immigration, 4 times higher than Tony Blair.
Keir Starmer's European tour was meant to be his grand entrance onto the world stage. Instead, it became a series of humiliating snubs and embarrassing moments that left him looking like a political amateur. From being ignored by Donald Trump to getting shut out of major events, Starmer's attempts to play statesman backfired spectacularly. But the real shock came when he returned home to face a brutal media grilling that exposed just how unprepared he really is. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Keir Starmer set out on his European tour with grand ambitions. He envisioned himself as a statesman ready to rebuild Britain's international relationships and solidify his position as a future Prime Minister. His itinerary was carefully crafted to showcase his diplomatic prowess, with high-profile meetings and events planned across the continent. But Starmer's dreams of international acclaim quickly unravelled.
We know full well the average British Brexiteer was not voting for sovereignty and so forth.
His first major setback came with a stinging exclusion from the Notre Dame reopening ceremony in Paris. This wasn't just a minor scheduling conflict. It was a clear signal that Starmer lacked the clout he thought he possessed on the world stage. As he stood on the sidelines while other political heavyweights took centre stage, the cracks in his carefully constructed image began to show. The implications of this snub were far-reaching. Political analysts were quick to point out that Starmer's exclusion from such a significant event spoke volumes about his standing in international circles. One commentator noted, "If Starmer can't even secure an invitation to a cathedral reopening, how can he hope to negotiate complex international agreements as Prime Minister?"
Requiring us to sign up to EU regulations and laws if he wants to get deals on veterinary agreements and so forth.
As the tour progressed, Frades, Starmer's attempts to salvage his image only seemed to highlight his weaknesses. His public statements about international cooperation and global challenges rang hollow, given his obvious struggle to secure meaningful diplomatic engagements. The contrast between his lofty rhetoric and his actual influence became increasingly apparent. But the real climax of Starmer's European disaster was yet to come. His encounter, or rather lack thereof, with Donald Trump in the United States was nothing short of embarrassing. Despite Starmer's team hyping up the meeting as a chance to rebuild the special relationship, Trump barely acknowledged the Labour leader's existence. The resulting awkward photo opportunities and stilted interactions became instant fodder for political commentators and social media alike. Niall Gardner, a former advisor, delivered a scathing assessment of Starmer's performance in Washington, describing him as weak and woke. This brutal characterization seemed to capture the prevailing sentiment. Starmer had failed to make any meaningful impact on the international stage. As Starmer boarded his flight back to the UK, the full extent of his European disaster was becoming clear. What was meant to be a triumphant tour had instead raised serious questions about his ability to represent British interests globally.
Because Keir Starmer, Rafe, it would appear, wants to try and get ever closer union with the organisation that we left in 2016.
With his credibility in tatters, Starmer now faced an even greater challenge, confronting a hostile British media primed to tear apart his every misstep. If Starmer thought facing Trump was uncomfortable, he was in for a rude awakening. 6 relentless BBC radio hosts were about to put him through a grueling 45-minute interrogation that would leave his political career hanging by a thread. How badly could a few local radio interviews possibly go? As Starmer stepped into the BBC studios, The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The British media, known for their unforgiving approach to politicians, had been sharpening their knives during his European tour.
Was the man who wanted to have a second referendum,
Yes,
didn't he?
and he was Brexit Secretary, shadow Brexit Secretary, wasn't he, under Jeremy Corbyn?
Now, they were ready to pounce on every misstep and inconsistency. From the moment the first question was asked, it became clear that Starmer was woefully unprepared. He struggled to articulate coherent answers to even the most basic policy questions. When pressed about winter fuel allowance cuts, Starmer made a critical error that would haunt him for days to come. He admitted he had never personally struggled to pay utility bills, a tone-deaf response that immediately alienated listeners grappling with the cost of living crisis. As the interviews progressed, Starmer's attempts to change the subject fell flat. When he tried to discuss the reintroduction of ASBOs, interviewers quickly shut him down, refusing to let him dodge their more pointed questions. The Labour leader found himself on the back foot, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. One particularly damaging exchange came during his interview with BBC Lincolnshire. The host confronted Starmer about his perceived disconnect with local farmers, asking bluntly if he had a problem with Lincolnshire. Starmer's fumbling response did little to assuage concerns about his relevance to rural communities, further eroding his support base.
Of backdoor conversations going on here, which would appear to be leading to us giving away, once again, the rights of the fishermen of this country.
As clips from the interviews began circulating on social media, the public reaction was swift and merciless. Users mocked Starmer's inability to provide coherent answers, with many labelling the interviews as deeply embarrassing. Political commentators joined the fray, noting that Starmer's communication style lacked clarity and effectiveness, further eroding public trust in his leadership. The full extent of the political damage caused by Starmer's media meltdown was becoming painfully clear. In just 45 minutes, he had managed to transition from an aspiring statesman to a leader struggling to defend his policies and connect with voters. The implications for his leadership and the Labour Party were dire.
The great Brexit betrayal. This was the man who basically quadrupled immigration, 4 times higher than Tony Blair.
As the dust settled on this disastrous media round, one question loomed large. Could Starmer recover from this self-inflicted wound, or had he just sealed his political fate? Keir Starmer's European tour and subsequent media appearances have dealt a devastating blow to his credibility. What was meant to be a showcase of his statesmanship turned into a series of embarrassing snubs and awkward encounters. From being sidelined at the Notre Dame reopening to his non-event with Donald Trump, Starmer's international standing took a beating. But the real damage came when he returned home. Facing a barrage of tough questions from BBC radio hosts, Starmer crumbled. His inability to articulate clear policies or connect with voters' concerns was painfully evident. The public reaction was swift and merciless, with social media awash with mockery and criticism. Now, British politics faces a crucial question. Can Starmer bounce back from this disaster, or is his leadership already beyond salvaging? The challenges facing him are immense. He needs to rebuild public trust, present a compelling alternative to the current government, and somehow overcome his image as a weak and disconnected leader. The future of Labour and British opposition politics hangs in the balance. If Starmer can't turn things around quickly, the party may find itself searching for yet another new leader. And in these turbulent times, a strong and effective opposition is more crucial than ever for the health of British democracy.